So 700 apps, 30,000
Yep.
users, and 3
And
months. Was it user migration and apps 3 months,
yeah,
or
so that was
just
the
the
whole
users?
end-to-end process,
Oh,
which was
okay.
crazy. Like
Wow.
I'd never
That's
seen a
crazy. Yeah.
Hello for Business deployment alone
And
move at
Hello
that
for
speed.
Business.
Yeah,
Yeah, we forgot about that.
the power of ID Gov when you're using attributes and the what's called an auto assignment is when that attribute changes upstream and then flows down into AD and then synchronizes up to Entra.
Yes.
ID Gov automatically adjusts your
Yeah.
entitlements because now I've changed from finance to sales. So it removes me from all of those
Right.
resources and then adds me to the relevant sales one.
EntraChat with Merill's live. Digging deep where techs thrive. From the latest hacks to cool updates. Join the ride, don't be late.
Hey folks, my name is Mel Fernando, and this is the EntraChat podcast, where we talk about all things Microsoft Entra. And today's guest in my very first episode of EntraChat is Ben Wolfe. Ben is the head of security solutions at Increment. They're an up-and-coming Microsoft partner in Australia, focusing on security, Entra, and other things. I'll let Ben talk more about that. And for those who don't know, Ben used to be my manager at Microsoft. And in fact, Ben, you were the person who recruited me. I remember like a long 1 hour call where you were convincing me that I should apply and
You
join.
didn't need
And
much convincing, to be honest, but
yes, but yeah, it was it changed my life in the sense I love being at Microsoft and the work that I do here. And so this podcast is a way for me to share things with the community, things that we learned as we deploy Entra and secure Entra. And I want folks to have like a podcast that they can listen, and folks can come in on the podcast and talk about all the lessons learned, ways we can avoid making the same mistakes that others did, and, share war stories from all of the fun things we do in our day job. So Ben, quick, maybe if you can tell us how you got started and how you came into Azure AD and what you're doing
yeah,
right now.
definitely. First of all, thanks. I'm honored to be your first guest. Hopefully, not the last. I don't want to curse it for you, but yeah, it's as you mentioned, my name's Ben Wolfe. So I'm at a partner called Increment. I lead the identity security practice there, and previously, as you know, we're at Microsoft together. I was focused on Entra. Now I'm still focused on Entra, which is really good because identity and Entra is a big passion space for me. But also looking after everything in the Microsoft 365 security ecosystem. So that's Sentinel, all of the Defender products, as they add those seemingly every week.
Yes.
And Entra itself, as well as, if we look at talking about the concept of Entra Suite, everything within Entra, which is massive. Within, I'm not an expert in, a lot of that, but my team are. And,
Right.
we've built a really good practice, and doing some interesting things at the forefront of those technologies. And I guess starting with Microsoft, I started there in the early 2000s, but it was with Exchange. So it was
Nice.
Exchange, would have been 2000 at the time, but we were still supporting Exchange 5.5. And that's really the introduction of Exchange 2000 was kind of my introduction to a proper directory, because that was Active Directory that provided the global address list, and all of the messaging, engineers, support engineers, we were forced to learn Active Directory. So it's Exchange 5.5. You really didn't need to know that because the directory came kind of with Exchange at that point.
Absolutely.
And so that was a huge learning curve, but it's also very interesting as I progressed through my career there as a support engineer and supporting the various iterations of Exchange. 2003, then 2007. A lot of the Exchange engineers that I see or that pop up today have a very similar career now to myself, where they've fallen into the cloud identity base.
Cloud
And I
ID.
feel like
Correct.
that was
Yeah.
because Exchange was really the very first mature cloud product that Microsoft offered that forcibly, but in a good way, made me and all of those people have to change, tact from adopting a different technology. And so when that came about, which was the BPOS suite, actually just before, before that,
Yes.
I was doing, it was called hosted messaging and collaboration, I think was the solution, which was
The very first.
anyone could basically spin up their own version of hosted Exchange, SharePoint. I think it was live communication server. It was all bundled, but you had to go and build it all, and it
Right.
was scripts, and it was horrendous. I remember printing out a manual. It took me all day, and that it was that big. I don't think I ever read any of it. But if you didn't actually follow the steps, like literally you
Yeah, you
missed
missed.
one, nothing worked, and it had to do like global address list segmentation because it was all shared, and you had to make sure this company couldn't see the
Right.
users in that company. And I think
Yeah.
that never took off, but the concept became BPOS, which was all the 2007 versions of the product at the time, Exchange, SharePoint, Link, and then that
Right.
matured so much it became Office 365 a couple of years later. And I,
Yeah.
just by extension, I think of having some experience with that hosted solution, I got asked to do BPOS and then just fell into more Office 365. And I also fell into a field engineer role at that time, which was just a complementary role to the support engineering team that I
Support
was
teams.
working in.
Right.
But I had to go out if there was what they call a crit sit, like a severity A, the server's down.
Right.
I had to go
Yep.
on site and like work with the customer and the support team, and to do that. But that's really when I took an interest in the cloud, because there was no Azure at that time, but you still had to then learn how do you extend your Active Directory into the cloud directory.
True.
And that's
Yep.
where my first kind of introduction to directory
Introduction.
sync, which if you look at it under the covers, I think it's exactly the same. It's a original like
Yeah.
FIM code base. If you dive right in, it's exactly the
Yes.
same, which is today called Entra Connect. And that's gone
Correct.
through so many iterations, but that was just to sync the objects. And then another foreign concept was federation. How do you sign in as a user using your AD credentials into Microsoft's cloud environment? And the only option at the time
Right.
was ADFS, or if you happen to have
Yes.
another IDP that supported SAML. And so I was forced to learn that, which was
Right.
also still a very foreign concept, but
Yeah.
is something that I'm still applying today with, because it's SAML. It's
Yes.
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so coming back to my point, like I think a lot of Exchange engineers went through that same journey because there was no more Exchange on-premises deployments.
Right.
Unless they were very secure or specific environments that needed that on premises, and everyone just went, Exchange in the
Yeah.
cloud. And so that work largely dried up. But I'm thankful it did, because I would never have learned the things I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
then I think just I moved away from Exchange because the other aspects of Office 365 really took off then, and Exchange became just something you didn't need to configure realistic. It was just doing
That's
things in the
true.
portal and fine tuning, but you didn't have to install and deploy and disk.
You didn't need to babysit
Exactly.
the whole thing.
And so then I just started focusing on Active Directory at the time, and then they spawned, the engineering team created that customer focused side of the business, which they didn't really have, to get that customer voice of,
Right.
oh, what are you, what challenges are you seeing with the product? You've purchased these licenses, but you might not be using a lot of the capabilities.
Right.
They introduced that enterprise mobility suite at the time, so the first iteration of Intune,
Right.
and kind of basic conditional access and things like that, and SSO to apps in Entra. And so adoption of that was quite slow because it was just largely foreign. I think also because of the problem where federation ADFS instances or another IDP were in place, because that's how you had to authenticate. And so customers just didn't really understand. They might have had two of the same thing, Azure AD and Okta
And
ping ADFS, and they were
yes.
not really adopting Entra or Azure AD at the time aggressively. And so this team was born and grew. It was really interesting and good team, and we worked with a lot of those big S500 customers to understand their challenges, which were a lot, because there were huge amounts of gaps at the time when you compare today, which are so small. And that's how we met. I think when you were at Telstra, we first, because I was looking after Telstra at the time, I think you were one of the first big customers that had adopted password hash sync, which is a big deal at the time.
Yes, it was in private preview and it was like my first introduction to like all of Azure AD. For me, it was just a login page, nothing more before, coming from a dev background. And so we were doing the password hash sync in private preview and stage rollout as well, because we couldn't just move 80,000 people overnight from on-prem to the cloud. Stage rollout was the big thing. And that's like I was telling you before, the things I learned there is basically a lot of what I'm using today, like all that knowledge and the things we learned during that time. And I remember having to call you almost like every other day, trying to figure out a project plan, because we were supposed to roll out Intune, and then we needed to work back from there as to, okay, if you're doing that, I first need to hybrid join the devices. And then if I'm doing hybrid join, then I first need to make sure I'm syncing the devices first, and like all those dependencies, which in the when you go through the docs are a lot better now than they used to be so long.
I have this weird, I wouldn't call it a skill, but I can remember obscure things like a problem and a fix from years ago, because you just jog my memory, because I think with syncing devices, there was a problem with the SCP record at the time, because it pointed to like a federated domain, and when you were doing password sync or stage rollout, it didn't know what to do because it was trying to use the federated endpoint to join the device, and it would fail. And I think we flipped something in the SCP to like on Microsoft domain, and it worked. Or
and then there was a fix that they rolled out into Windows to make it smarter.
That's
to know
right.
If
it
you're
could
in stage
fall
rollout
back to something else. But that's an example, stage rollouts of a feature that our team, that feedback from customers, like you can't move 80,000 users in one hit by breaking federation. You've got to have an approach. Otherwise, adoption, people were scared because password hash sync had password in the name. So everyone thought it's, clear text password. So there was that whole battle. But, probably little did you know at the time, I didn't know what to do. You'd send me an email to call me. I was like, I don't know what to do. But, thankfully I had the resources, to call on, to get the answers. But it's weird how you remember those. I can't remember someone's name, but I can remember a resolution of problem like 8 years ago, which is a useless skill. But I think, because when I think back, you were developer focused, so it's amazing, when you finally did come to Microsoft, you brought such a different viewpoint from our traditional hiring pool, because a lot of people in the team were pretty much from the same pool of kind of careers that I come from, like either a support engineer or a field engineer, which is good. Like it was really, but bringing someone from a customer into that team, and then someone with a developer focus as well, all the, you introduced me to like using Graph like aggressively. We were doing MS Online modules at the time, and you never really played with Graph per se, but now like it's really addictive. Like I was terrified of it, because it's such a foreign concept, but you realize how powerful it is once you start playing with it. And it's like anything, you've got to start playing with it to appreciate what it can do.
You can extend it quite a lot. And for me, the moment happened because when I used to work in a corporate, in an enterprise, we had to, when we build apps, we had to call on-prem AD.
Yep.
And this is in an enterprise. They're running their billing systems in an ISP. Like all their revenue, like the millions of dollars, comes from those billing servers, and they need AD up and running. And if that goes down, they lose money. So it was tightly controlled what apps could call into AD, even though there were no guardrails. They were monitoring, and they would look at what you did. And it was like you needed a 3-month project just to call a few APIs into AD, because they protected it so much, because it was a loss of revenue for them. And they had like 30, 50, I don't know, so many servers on-prem AD. And then when I was introduced to Azure AD as a dev, and I'm like, here's this Graph API, you go to town with it, you can call any amount as you want, and it has automatic throttling. And the IT team don't worry about it. Like they're not policing it, in the sense they're not worried that we'll bring down the servers. So that is when it clicked for me that this was going to be the central piece for lots of devs, enterprise devs, line of business.
I guess
and even
it's having that picture of the problem on-prem, and then how it's solved here, but you've got to have that problem first to appreciate. I think you actually were able to like put some apps up there, which was a big effort, I think, at Telstra at the time.
Yes, it took a lot of time, because you couldn't just build a thing and call LDAP queries against the server. You would bring it down, because there were times during the end of the month where it was like all the servers were running hot, and you had to be really careful.
You got to get paid, you got to bill.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when I saw the light that AD, Azure Active Directory, was going to be a really important part of the future, right? Like we go from here to there, and it's at the center of a lot of things. And most of us get or need to look after Azure AD as part of our day job of doing something else. And Azure AD is sort of something on the side that you manage. And I think a lot of the folks who are listening today would be coming from you're not like learning Azure AD and becoming an identity IAM expert. It's where you're doing Teams or Exchange or something else, and then you're handed you have Azure AD also to look after, or now Entra.
I know, and it's it can be daunting, but it also shows how Office 365 probably took a lot of that shine away from Azure AD. Like it was so fundamental to everything, but that Office, people didn't realize they had Office 365 if you had Azure AD, or if you didn't have Office 365 but you're using Azure, you had Azure AD.
You had Azure AD.
It was very confusing, like how you got about to having Azure AD. It was never consistent, which was another problem. And I think that's probably, and also the name never did it a helpful justice well. So I think Entra, even though there's people that don't like that name, I think that people forget over it.
There are so many listeners who will say, I'm going to call it Azure AD till the day.
I like Azure AD. It's got a nice ring to it, but I can see, if you look at it, when you look at the documentation, it can be very confusing. But I think that was the other problem. The success of Office 365 also prevented like true adoption of Azure AD capabilities, like adding more applications. The gallery had to build up, with the popular SaaS applications, Salesforce and things like that. And then I think once you had conditional access that was mature and ADFS, you'd look at it and go, why is this customer still running ADFS? And it was purely because they did Office 365 in 2016. And even today I still come across it where they're running ADFS. And that's the only reason it's there. It's got one relying party trust to Office 365, but it might have, the whole infrastructure. 4 servers was the minimum recommended,
Yes.
and then you got certificates and monitoring. And so, you can instantly, decommission all of that and get much better experience as an end user, which I think is what you should focus on. Like, forget the core technology. How can you improve the end user experience? Windows Hello for Business and not seeing any sign-in pages and things like that. That's the thing to focus on and abstract away. But it's all facilitated by Entra under the covers.
Exactly, and it's a growing trend because people come up to the licensing renewals, and then they're looking at costs for the year, and then you have this ADFS that now they need to upgrade their Windows servers end of life. So now why? Then the questions start getting asked like, why do we have this many servers? Why are we patching them? Why are we managing and maintaining them? Why don't we move that to Azure AD? So, which brings me to some of the stuff you've been doing now around migrating from other identity providers. So, tell us, like, I think you do some large migration?
We've
recently
actually have done a few, and the last one we did was very large. It was just shy of 700 applications, and it was in pairing with using that stage rollout feature. And it was paired with the experience of when you were, so for people listening, stage rollout is your Entra is federated with like ADFS or Okta. So when you sign in, Entra goes, you've got to go over here, sign in there, and then it'll come back and present, proof that you've signed in, the assertion, and then Entra lets you in and gives you, the path to whatever you need to access at that point. The stage rollout is a concept of a group. You flick it on in Entra, and then you point it to a group, and anyone that you drop in that group, that flow is broken. And so when I say broken, like you're no longer going to the IDP, but you do have to have a cloud authentication method turned on so that user can authenticate, like password hash sync or pass-through authentication. But the beauty is you can take that user out of the group again, and they're back to the federation flow. So it's really low risk and easily test and reversible. So we were using that to great effect, where we would drop users into that group. Those users, because the other challenge is now everyone has to register for MFA in Entra. If you're using Okta Verify and now you're hitting Entra, you want or you need people to register for MFA there. And so,
so this is, you were migrating from Okta.
This one was Okta, but it's true of any IDP. It's even true like IDP, going from Entra to somewhere else. The concept is exactly the same.
Is the same.
But at least with stage rollout, what it was being used quite effectively for was when tranches of users were dropped into that group week by week. Not only were they now using Entra to authenticate, they were also prompted to enroll for Windows Hello for Business. So the device was because the mandate naturally is you want people to using a passwordless, phish-resistant credential. So it always annoyed me somewhat when I would see Windows 10 out in the wild and no one using Windows Hello for Business. I remember, I was using it when it was first on offer at Microsoft. It was like around 2015 or 16. I used it that whole time. I couldn't have, pictured never using anything else. And then you'd still see people Windows 10 signing in with their username password.
Typing in the password.
It's like the analogy is, here's an iPhone, never turn on Face ID.
Typing the pin.
And so, they were using that as a mechanism. So to not only move you over to Entra, but now you would get a device, and that would be enabled for Windows Hello for Business. And as part of that bootstrapping, you'd be you'd register for MFA because you got to have an MFA to bootstrap into Hello for Business.
So you did both like a stage rollout and MFA at the same time, like the Windows Hello switch
exactly,
at the same time.
So that user was basically taken through. And in the end, everyone was worried there'd be a lot of hand-holding and help desk calls.
Yeah, that's very brave. Like that's doing two things at the same time. Like, would you still do that, or did you run into issues and would you want to do it separately?
I'll put full credit on the customer because they chose that path. Right. And I was really impressed because normally I happily do that because I think it's worth wearing the pain. And then you discover the issues and then you just fix them, and help desk improves the process and those issues shouldn't surface. But I think they showed us some metrics, and the help desk calls related to that process was actually like really low to what they thought it would be. And the number, I think, we did all of this in 3 months. So 700 apps, 30,000 users, 3 months.
Okay, so 700 apps, 30,000 users, and 3 months. Was it user migration and apps 3 months?
Yeah, so that was the whole end-to-end process, which was crazy. Like I'd never thought, I'd never seen a Hello for Business deployment alone.
And Hello for Business, we forgot about that.
And so that was really tight time frame. But the number of help desk calls they had was, I think, 1,500 over the 3-month period, and 80% of that they worked out was people pressing the wrong number associated with the problem. Like, you call up and say, press 1, you've got a Hello for Business problem. Press 2, it's something else. So they were redirected to the wrong, so they never had a problem. So I think the actual number ended up being something like 400 people that just needed some type of assistance. And generally it was just, did you read the instructions? Like on screen it says do this, did you? And once they read the instructions, that's all. That there were actually no real big problems. And before we did that, what we did was pre-stage all the applications. So we created bookmarks in Entra of all the 700 apps in Okta. And everyone started using My Apps before they were migrated. And so the My Apps experience,
so they were still in Okta,
they were all still in Okta,
and they were using the Entra My Apps.
And there was no way to stop people using the Okta dashboard, but they started to try and get people to use the My Apps portal. And when they went there, it just looked the same because it was the same apps, icons, user assignment. And so if you clicked on one of those, under the covers, it just went back to Okta and then onto the application. So we did that first, and then one by one, we just burnt through the application migration.
How was that experience? Like, were there like SAML? Do you know how many what SAML?
Predominantly, it was SAML. I'd say it was 80% SAML, 20% OADC. And I'll give Okta credit here. OADC is much easier in Okta than in Entra, and their documentation is much, when you're trying to understand OADC, and like they make it so simple in there. And then you look at the Microsoft documentation, it's like you've got an enterprise app, you've got a app registration. They're kind of two objects that become one, but they're different purposes. But you do, so it can be very confusing.
And your service principals.
Exactly.
Well.
So when you're coming from Okta and trying to look like it is like, I can appreciate it. It's like, it doesn't really flow. But that was probably the more challenging bit, translating, it's configured like this in Okta, and here's like how you do it here. The SAML stuff is all very rinse and repeat.
It's mostly similar.
It's like
with the transformations and rejects.
Yeah, they weren't too bad. There was always a missing claim. There were some really weird things, like an application wanted SAML 1.1 versus and if you did like SP initiated sign-on, it would work. But then you went IDP initiated from Entra, and it wouldn't say what's going on. Then you could see in the SP initiated, it sends a policy.
They're sending
Entra honors it, but then when you go from Entra, that policy is missing. It's okay. I know what to do. So we got really good at looking at SAML traces, and there's really awesome like browser extensions. Years ago, you'd
true.
have to do a fiddler trace and
Yes,
get
yeah,
the decode like deflators, and now you
yeah.
just put in the extension. It's like,
Now,
oh,
and
look at
they
that.
color code it and they show
Yeah,
it
it's
nicely,
like
right? All the
I
SAML
was going to call my mum up and do a few app
extension.
migrations. It was that.
Yeah.
But it was, yes, it was all about claims. Like there'd always be one claim. Like a lot of the time it was like you could do it in 5 minutes because you're just exchanging an XML file. The really good popular apps are so
Right.
easy because it's just XML
Yeah.
file here, and it's done.
Right.
But some like
Did you use any tools for all of that? Like 700, did you like
yeah,
script
we
them and
built
create
a
them?
tool
Yeah.
that did the so it all uses the API. So it talks to the Okta API and talks to the Graph
Right.
API. So it can
Right.
it uses a read-only Okta API key to
Right.
scrape all of the applications and all of the claims and all of the
Nice.
user assignments. And we could mirror that in Entra through the Graph API. So basically you recreate the app and
Right.
you reassign the, if it's like a Okta only cloud group where it doesn't exist in AD or in Entra, you've got to
Right.
recreate it and repopulate the users, which we had a process. If they were syncing the
Nice.
group and it was the same group in both, that was easy. But then
Right.
we would bring across the claims. Claims still need a lot of massaging. I
Manual.
think now
Right.
in
Yeah.
Entra you can create claims better through Graph, where
Right.
before you
Yeah.
couldn't really. But the Okta claims are in a different format. You'd have to do a lot of manipulation. Sometimes it was just as easy to go in and add one
Just
claim
reconfigure
manually.
them. Right.
Yeah, but so we did all of that through tooling, and then when time came to migrate, we just had a application tracker, and identifying the application owners is probably where all of the time goes.
Yeah, that's usually
And buy-in from
the
those owners because they don't care. Oh, is it
correct.
like
Yeah.
that's not what they're thinking about in their
Yeah.
app. Where does it go to sign a
Yeah.
user in? So once we did that, we could do them in 5 minutes. Like we could do
Right.
quite
Each app.
just depending scheduling meetings, and we were doing them in business hours because there was no real impact. If something went wrong,
Oh,
you just
okay.
point it
You could.
back. But most of the
Right.
time we powered through because it was just a claim that we had to, it was
Nice.
either like a case sensitive claim or something really weird.
Right.
And so it was just really that conveyor belt of applications and burning
Going through.
through. And it was, huge amount of learning, huge amount of
Yeah.
apps I've never heard of. And how does this work? Everything was like, oh, it's doing it this way. It's weird. Or some apps, the vendors don't let you configure the SSO configuration, and then those ones charge horrendous amounts of money to do what are simple changes behind it. It's almost criminal, some of them, where they say, well, it's thousands of dollars for us to change to import this XML file just because they don't expose it in their interface for you as the app administrator.
Oh, okay.
They were very small, but they're always curious, those ones. And then some really curly on-prem ones. That were using odd libraries to do SAML and things like
SAML,
that.
Yeah.
And so it was actually really interesting. I don't know code at all, but you get to a point where you knew kind of where to look into code and go, oh, it's okay, I can see what it needs, and away you go.
Through.
And so lots of learning.
Were there any apps that you couldn't move because there were issues with Entra didn't support?
There was one where it was an app that required an LDAP interface, which Okta provides.
Oh, okay.
And again, Okta has some simplistic and really cool capabilities. To do the same in Entra, you've got to spin up an Active Directory domain services instance to get an LDAP interface that's secure.
Right.
And there's an associated cost with that. So that's where, when you look at things like that, some things in Entra do need some, fine tuning and improvements. But also, if you've got an app that's doing LDAP, well, maybe it's time to modernize that app and point it to the Graph API. So there's, arguments for both on that.
So did you finish all the apps first before you started stage rollout of users?
No,
or
so we
did
just
you do the users first?
Users were just happening all the time over that 3 months, but because we had the My Apps portal populated, to them, it didn't matter whether the app was migrated or not, because if it was, it worked, but it just went through Entra. If it wasn't, they just got flicked to
Okay.
Okta, and they
Right.
could still authenticate there.
Right. So you're basically doing two streams. Like you did the app migrations and the user migrations, and they were both running parallelly, and you were flipping over apps and flipping over
Yep.
users
So
at
the
the same
customer's
time.
really doing
Wow.
the
Nice. Yeah.
stage rollout work,
Right.
putting people
Yeah.
in a group, but we ensured, conditional access was in place properly. So as apps were migrated, you want to make sure they're protected as you migrate them over.
Right.
And we could see how Okta was configured, so you can do the equivalent conditional access in Entra,
Right.
and then it's just burn through.
Nice. And then the final step is the switching of the domain over.
Yep.
Was that part
Last
of
step
the change?
was just to unfederate the
Federation.
domain
Right.
from Entra, which is one line of PowerShell, which breaks the federation trust, which is easy to
Right.
repair as well. Equally just one line of PowerShell, and then Entra just no longer sends anything to Okta, and the stage rollout feature was just turned off.
Right. You would have had to do some conditional access policies as well, right?
Yep.
Because I'm assuming they didn't have many policies.
No, because all of that was happening in Okta, so
right?
our tooling could also see the policies, and also we could go into the Okta portal.
The portal. Oh, so you translated all the Okta
So we
policies
looked at what they were, and then we okay, this is how you would do it as a equivalent conditional access policy. There's some things that you can't do the same, but conceptually, it's similar way. I think the one thing we did notice was that Entra was very strict with how it adheres to SAML standards. So I think which is a good thing. For example, in Okta, you could have a reply URL that was HTTP. Entra doesn't allow; it's got to be HTTPS.
Oh, it has to be HTTPS.
So some applications is where we hit where it would, like an on-prem one, it would only accept HTTP. It was kind of hard coded,
right?
And so they had to change the application to accept HTTP, but Entra wouldn't let you put in. And so those differences where Okta kind of let you be a bit looser, Entra was very strict.
To the
but
spec,
I think that's a positive when you look at it, even though that's
because you're moving to a more secure format as well. And I think it came from learnings where we had HTTP and you could do man in the middle and things a lot easier.
And NTIDs was another weird one because they aren't a thing in Okta. Like it just goes, whatever the app said it is, I'll send that back. Whereas Entra, you've got to define it. And so you can't have duplicates. Whereas in Okta, you might have multiple instances of the same app that use the same entity ID because the app sends it.
Right.
Entra, you had to distinguish them individually. So that was
it needs to be unique on the Entra side.
So I learned a lot. I thought I knew a decent amount, but I learned a lot about SAML and OADC. To the point where it's like, I thought I understood it. I realized I didn't. And now I think I understand it better now, but there's still I look at it, I'm not quite sure. But that's a journey itself.
I mean, to date, I forget and I need to refresh myself on all the
I know. OADC and then it's which one's a protocol and which one isn't.
For some reason, it's something that never sticks to my mind.
Same.
And I know folks that can quote the spec. I don't think I'll ever be that person.
I don't think you want to be, but I'm the same. It just doesn't stick. Other stuff sticks, but then that one I've always got to go back. Okay, that's this. So that was apps, and I guess the other one we've been doing a lot of, which again I really probably in hindsight didn't have a lot of deep knowledge of, was governance, identity governance.
Right. Just before going into that, there's one other thing I do have. So you were moving the users and the auth as well. I'm sure they would have had to. You talked about Hello for Business on the desktop.
Yep.
They would have had to set up auth as well, right? Because they were using Okta, Verify, and those versions. So there would have been a process for them to get those users to register their maybe the phone.
That's right. So
SMS
they
and
would
so on. Yeah.
when they were added to stage rollout, the next time they log in, they were prompted to register for
Right.
MFA. We enabled the Authenticator app. There were some corner cases where we had to use SMS, but Authenticator app was the standard.
So, right. So it was just part of stage rollout. You didn't do anything beforehand. You
No.
just, as part of stage rollout, they would just go into the flow of, oh, you're the first time signing
Yep.
in, go through, set up the authentic. Oh,
And
nice.
here's the
So that
use the
worked well.
Authenticator app. Here's the instructions to download it. Yeah, they could take a photo of
Right.
the QR code and download it and
Right.
get going. And once
Okay.
they were registered, then the Hello for Business
Would
enrollment
kick in.
kicked in,
Right.
which they would choose
Oh,
to.
so this is a massive, like,
I know.
this is an all-in-one, because they are doing MFA registration as well as Hello for Business all in the same
Do you
flow.
remember at
That's-
Microsoft we used to run all of those Hello for Business workshops and to try and
Yes.
convince everyone, and
Yep.
I don't think globally anyone did anything like this number in that time frame.
It's an all-in-one. Yeah,
And
it's really
outside
good.
of just giving someone a brand new device for the first time, which is generally how they approach it, where you
Right.
Entra joined and
Yeah.
it bootstraps that way. And so we're doing cloud trusts as well, so everything just worked on-prem. So
Right.
again, these are the
With Hello
features
for Business.
when you think back that didn't exist, because that's what was blocking
Yes.
Hello for Business deployments. Like certificate trust was horrendous. You needed ADFS,
Yes.
you needed certificate services,
Yeah.
and then Key Trust solved
Yeah.
that, but you still needed specific domain controller versions, which was a blocker. And so Key Trust
Right.
just simplified all of that. And then
Nice.
just everything just, really.
That is an awesome migration
Yeah.
story. Like going from completely being on Okta for Auth and Okta Verify and all the apps on Okta to doing everything on Entra and completely shutting down Okta and doing it in 3
Yep.
months with that many users and apps. I mean, that's
You wouldn't
that's
have
a good
thought it was
story there.
possible. And if I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't there.
If someone told me to do it in 3 months, I would have gone.
No way.
This is going to take long. I would have done one thing at a time, just to reduce the, like, me being a risk averse person, I would have said, let's just do first one thing and then do the other. But here you've shown, like, that shows how far Entra, like, the technology has come from when where they used to be, like, I would say even like 4 years ago, where we have Cloud Trust and the Hello for Business is seamless, Windows 11 helping there, and all the work Microsoft put in to help bring all the apps and the registration and things up to par. And because there used to be apps you couldn't convert because Entra didn't support the claim transformation. And so on, and a lot of that.
I think we had to do a lot of group claims, and I know that was a big gap for a long time in in claims. And one that came up actually recently, which I didn't realize was still a gap in Entra, is you can't send manager as a claim in SAML.
Yes,
which you would think, that's like that seems obvious that you should be able to do that, and you can't do that easily. You've got to start moving the value into a different attribute, and that in itself is painful.
I was just helping another customer, right? You need to sync. You need to use the connect sync to create a new manage attribute. Extension attribute, put that in there, and then use that. Because
you look at a user in Entra and it shows their manager, but it's just a reference. It's not like an attribute on the user's account. So you've got to follow the breadcrumb to link it together, which isn't easy. So I think without those enhancements that landed a few years ago, like, you wouldn't have been able to do something like this. To be honest, this project was just not possible, or you would have to do so many workarounds or re-architecting of the app to change how it worked, that it would just be too much effort. But I think when there's a commercial aspect to it, that forces you to hit a specific deadline, that helps as a driver as well. and really good ownership from the
Nice.
customer side. You've got to have that stakeholder.
You need absolutely
Yeah.
right. Like you need, because they are driving a lot of the change and the change management. There's a lot of comms
Yep.
with users
Yep.
and training.
So we have really good,
that's,
program management on their side, on our side. Business analysts kind of looking at things and putting it together. But that was just the upfront stuff, and then afterwards, it really was just cookie cutter.
cookie cutter, right? Going through that. Nice. All right. So you're going to tell me about governance.
Yeah. The way I guess I explain it is, you've got all of these resources in Entra and in AD, and normally you assign people access to these resources. It might be through a group or directly to the app. But then when that person leaves the company or changes roles, they shouldn't have access to the app if they've changed roles, or if they've left. You want every bit of access removed and the account removed as well, or disabled. But how do you kind of automate or govern that? So identity governance is the Entra IGA Gov, or ID Gov, sorry, that's what it's called. You've got SailPoint is the other very popular one that's out there, Savient. They all kind of do the same thing, but I guess the value here with Entra is it's baked into Entra itself, and by extension, it's very easy to start governing cloud workloads like your Office 365 workloads, SaaS apps. But also it can, a little known fact is, it can also govern on-prem resources through Cloud Sync by manipulation of 80 groups that are sync from the cloud. So taking that manual process out of who should remove, should this person have access? I don't know. And who should remove it? I don't know. So identity governance helps solve that. But to get to that point is very difficult, because what you've got to do is deconstruct the customer's environment, and both at the resource level and the user level, like what are the personas, what makes this persona, this, like, is it this attribute that's the or this attribute value that defines this person is in finance or is in sales, and then where is that source from? Is it coming from the upstream, like HR system like Workday or Salesforce, or something old and clunky? It might just be a spreadsheet that they're provision, like someone's updates a spreadsheet and then someone just creates the account manually. So we did all of that deconstruction. Again, we've got a really good team of business consultants that did that side of the work. And then once we kind of understood that, my team was responsible for then translating that into entitlements, which is the concept of access packages, which is how Microsoft presents, like, what you in the finance department get, which is like just a container that has, like, the apps you're allowed to use, the groups you're a member of, and things like that. But the power of ID Gov when you're using attributes and the what's called an auto assignment is when that attribute changes upstream and then flows down into AD and then synchronizes up to Entra, ID Gov automatically adjusts your entitlements, because now I've changed from finance to sales. So it removes me from all of those resources and then adds me to the relevant sales one. It all sounds simple now that I replay it, but I remember reaching out to you late that night trying to create these access packages through Graph, because once you reach double digit access package numbers, you really need to start doing it through code. And you
can't be doing by hand.
And I always avoided doing anything by code because I didn't know how to code, but I've thankfully somewhat scraped through it since. But I guess this is coming back to a war story, and I guess you probably know better than anyone the nuances of Graph and how you can do something through the portal, and then you look at the documentation and it says here's how you would do it through Graph, but it doesn't work. And then your Claims X-ray plugin, like that's a godsend. If anyone listening hasn't tried it, like you've got to try it. You've got to have a use case to, I think, appreciate the value. But
Yes.
what you should do is when you are in the Entra portal, install Merill's Graph X-Ray plugin. And then when you do something in the portal, you'll see what it called under the covers. And it even gives you the PowerShell, commandlet name and everything it called. So you can duplicate that through PowerShell yourself, except for when Entra is not using public APIs.
The Entra portal itself. That's true.
Yeah, that's actually really how I started to appreciate, understand Graph better, was using your plugin. Because you start playing through Graph Explorer, which is really good, but it doesn't you don't know what to put in to see the output. So at least,
it takes you longer to get to the actual command that you need to run.
So at least yours shows you, here's what it did, and then you can put that in Graph X-Ray and take it further. And so that was a real learning exercise of doing access packages through code, and a lot of complications with having to use a combination of the V1 graph module and pairing it with the beta module, because you can only do certain things via the beta, the V1. So you had to mash together
in the API.
And then there was that whole missing bit. There was nothing documented that how to do this one thing, which you helped me resolve. Thank God.
We did something naughty, which is we ended up calling the 1P API, which
we found through
you are technically
the Edge, any browser. We got the network trace and saw what it was actually calling, because we could do it through the portal, but we couldn't replicate it through PowerShell. And we were like, okay, you said, let's see what it's calling, and so you could see. And then we just did I think it was an invoke web request. We just copied what it was calling.
I think all the browsers, they have, you can just right click on any network request and you can copy it as PowerShell, and it even puts in all the tokens. So you can just right click copy in the network trace in Chrome, Edge, and then you can just call. So you're basically calling the 1P API, which I guess for what you were doing is sort of okay, because these are one-time things. You're not writing code that's going to be running all the time, because that's where the 1P APIs could change at any time, and your service will stop working. So that's the reason why you should avoid using 1P APIs. But
we had no choice, right? It was the only way to do it.
No choice.
And
you had to create 70 packages?
It was 300 in the end.
300, right? So you had a day to create 300 packages.
And I think, as you mentioned, it includes the token when you copy it out of the browser. And I think I just was able to scrape by creating 300 access packages before that token hit its 60-minute expiry, which I couldn't fix. But I remember just going, oh my God, I was watching the timer. I was like, this is gonna bomb. But the problem was, now that I think back, because we needed to attach a custom extension to the access package, which is just a logic app behind the scenes. And so Microsoft didn't provide a way to do that through Graph, but you could do it through the portal, and that's where it was calling off to that secret API endpoint to attach the custom extension. So really, again, amazing, learn, you just think, you think Graph. You kind of know enough, but you get to that point, and it was I learned just that night alone, I learned a huge amount. I've used to this day, right? Just that, what you mentioned, copying something out of Edge into PowerShell. Didn't even know you could do that, right? It was That's
I think it's a new thing. I'm not sure that many people know that you can do PowerShell, because there is curl and other languages, but having a Microsoft thing in a Chrome browser is a cool thing. So with that deployment, what was how many packages did you create overall, and users? Were they moving from another sort of governance solution, or they were moving from
all manual? So you imagine someone was onboarded, or people changed roles frequently, and it was because they weren't really changing roles per se, but they were functioning like temporarily in different roles as part of like job description. So if you went to a different location, the applications they accessed, you had to have a concept of a
Right.
different like business role. And so
Right.
we had to take everything that was manual, and automate it, and including all of the individual role definitions, because there were so many. That's why we had to create so many access packages, because
Right.
a single individual might
Different.
assume 12 different roles, business roles.
Right.
And so we had to understand the target application, how that was architected, and then we also had to understand, how the user was being onboarded, and then translate that
Right.
into access packages. And what we actually also had to do was use the custom claims provider API, where you would, for SAML claims, we didn't have the information in Entra that the target application needed to be present in the claims.
Right.
And so a really good developer on our team created an API that had like a lookup table of all of this other business logic. So if you were like this role, then you
Right.
got this extra claim, and that claim was injected in the SAML assertion. So when you signed into that application, it adjusted your access. And
wow.
it's
So that was the custom claims
so you
provider
create
that they built.
you add it to the enterprise app in Entra, and you link the app to
Right.
that claims provider. And so when you sign in, Entra,
This code would run.
Entra, I think,
Entra would
pauses
call.
the issuance of the token, calls out to the API.
Calls.
The API,
And that's hosted in Azure.
it was
an
an
Azure
Azure function app, and then it
Right.
would return the information that would be included as claims, and then
Into
it
the
would
claim.
finally issue it. So you could see it would add, like, say, about a second to the sign-in, as it had to
To
go
the
off
sign-in.
and talk to it.
Right.
But that was the only way we could do it, because all of that information wasn't present, and it was too complicated. You need some extra logic to say, okay, you're this
and it's
user.
dynamic, right? It's
Exactly.
not a static thing that you would have
Exactly.
in the Entra.
So that was a really interesting one, and a really interesting solution to a problem. That I would.
I mean, and that's the reason it exists as well,
Exactly.
right? Like if you don't need the Entra team building all of that, you can plug in with your own custom claims
if you think
provider
about it,
and
you've got
have
these
it work.
specific claims to use, which are quite extensible, and the transformation. But then, if the information isn't there, it's no good as a claim, which is the whole purpose of that claims provider. And I think that only existed a year before, as well.
Yes, it's fairly new. I don't think many people even know that.
No, and
you can do such a thing.
I didn't either, but incredibly powerful when you think of the use cases. So and that was so access packages were really interesting, but also curious, because auto assignment to access packages create an underlying dynamic group in Entra, and so all of a sudden you've got 300 dynamic groups. And the user goes into that dynamic group first before getting assigned to the access package. And those groups aren't named very nicely. And so if you're a Entra administrator and you're not aware of what's going on in identity governance, all of a sudden you've seen 300 new groups with horrible names in there, you'd probably go and delete them or ask, what the hell are these? And Microsoft say, don't touch these groups. I touched them. I deleted them just to see what happened in my environment. Like they
didn't they say do not delete?
Do not delete. Not on the group itself, but in the documentation. Nothing on the description, but you got to read the documentation. It says, don't touch these. But if you delete them, they just get recreated. But it does actually.
So it's not that.
It's not that bad, but it does cause like a 24-hour delay to rebuild and reassign people to the access back. Because I had to test it, because I knew someone would do that. And so I was just curious. I thought, well, I know it's going to happen. So what happens when you do delete this? I think they're trying to hide these groups eventually, which would make sense. But stringing that together, like, they go in the group first, and then the group
and then
assigns, was a interesting way. But access packages are really cool once you get your head around it, and also linking them to custom extensions, because basically they can do anything. Anything you can do, dream up, that you can put in a custom extension, the access package can do. So it's many scenarios outside of just what I described, like onboarding a guest into your tenant through an access package, and having a process and collecting attributes, or just provisioning a user into some legacy application that doesn't have a traditional API to interact with. You can modernize it, drag it into the
that's so powerful. Like I'm like, that's a part of Entra. If you haven't used it, you wouldn't even know the depth of what you can do with those access packages and those attributes. And
then that's the My Access portal as an end user as well. Like, people don't know that exists. You've got the My Apps, you've got the My Groups, the My Apps, but My Access is getting better now, because they're improving how, if you've got lots of access packages, only present the ones that are applicable to you and things like that. So it's if you've got the license for it, play with it. Like, you just need E5 at a minimum, but if you want to do all the advanced automated stuff, you need ID Gov.
Right. Cool. Thank you so much, Ben. This I feel like we can go on talking about all of the deployments.
We should talk about something else other than. But
well, this is the EntraChat.
Well, that's true. That's true.
It's all Entra.
It's good to join your show, and like I said, I can't believe Entra would be as good as it is today if you actually hadn't have joined the team, because your feedback and improvements and interaction with the community, like that didn't exist before you came on board. And so you're very active on, like, that's how I keep up with Entra these days. Like, your newsletter, I encourage you.
I keep up because of that.
I know, but I encourage everyone to sign up to Merill's newsletter. We used to issue out a newsletter internally at Microsoft, but only to a select few of customers. And Merill's one is available for everyone, but your one, and also the MVPs and other people out, the amount of creative solutions they exist that you discover just out on GitHub. Like, it's amazing what people are doing.
Yeah, and so much we learn, and that's the reason for me to start this podcast as well. Is different people like getting the information in different ways, and a podcast is a way to, if you're a person who likes listening to stuff while you're doing your various things, running or your daily chores and so on, this becomes a way to just listen in on people's stories. It's things that you might not go into a blog post, but this, what we learned today, how you did those deployments. I'm sure so many would find it useful, especially people who are considering migrating from Okta, or even folks who are in the middle of an Okta or even an ADFS migration. I'm sure
you can find it useful. Go to sleep listening to Entra talk.
With Ben. And if they need help, if they are Australian customers,
if they
reach out. And I mean, even if you're not in Australia.
That's true. We do all of Australia and New Zealand, but if anyone's interested in talking, or you have particular problems in the space that we just discussed, or Entra in general, like I don't know if you put it in the you share my email address, feel free to reach out. Always happy to talk.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been really fun, and I'm sure we'll get you on again at some point. I'm just recording the first few batches of the show, so I'm very excited to launch it.
Can't wait to listen to it. I just don't like listen to my voice. I'll make an exception this time.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Merill.